In the vast expanse of international waters, where lawlessness reigns supreme, a supply vessel cuts through the morning mist. For the pirates watching through high-powered binoculars, it's just another lucrative target. They don't know they're being watched. Miles away, in the belly of a stealth vessel, 6 men in tactical gear review thermal imaging screens. These aren't ordinary soldiers. They're Navy SEALs, the deadliest maritime special operations force ever created. For 3 weeks, they've been tracking this particular band of pirates, responsible for 7 hijackings, 3 murders, and millions in stolen cargo. What's about to unfold isn't just another rescue mission. This is the story of how the world's most notorious pirates learned that some waters are better left undisturbed, and some predators hunt in silence until it's too late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the helm of the MV Meridian Dawn, her experienced eyes scanning the horizon where steel-grey waves merged with clouds. 20 years at sea had taught her to read the ocean like a book, and today's chapter spoke of brewing trouble. The barometer had been dropping steadily for the past 6 hours, matching her growing unease. "How's our heading, James?" she called to her first mate, who was hunched over the radar display. James Martinez had served with her for the past 5 years, and his expertise in navigation had gotten them through more than one close call. "Steady at 142 degrees, Captain. We're making good time, despite the weather." He paused, frowning at his screen. "Though I'm picking up some unusual interference on the long-range radar. Could be the storm, but—" His voice trailed off as he made minute adjustments to the equipment. The Meridian Dawn wasn't just another supply vessel. Below decks, secured in temperature-controlled containers, lay millions of dollars worth of medical supplies bound for 3 different ports in Southeast Asia. Vaccines, emergency medical equipment, and specialized medications. Cargo that could mean the difference between life and death for thousands. Sarah moved to the window, binoculars in hand. The crew of 32 had been carefully vetted, each bringing years of maritime experience to their roles. Through her lenses, she watched as Rodriguez and Thompson, 2 of her senior engineers, performed routine maintenance on the deck machinery. Further aft, the security team conducted their hourly patrols, their movements precise and professional. The ship's manifest listed basic medical supplies, but Sarah knew better. Among the regular shipment lay experimental treatments and prototype medical devices, their true value far exceeding the insurance declaration. It was the kind of cargo that attracted attention, the wrong kind of attention. "Captain," James called out, his voice carrying a new edge of concern. "That interference I mentioned, it's moving. 3 distinct signatures coming in from the southeast. Speed suggests small craft, possibly fast attack vessels." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. "Alert security. Initiate Protocol Delta, and get me a secure line to Maritime Operations Command." As James moved to comply, Sarah's mind raced through her options. Her previous life as a tactical officer in the Singapore Navy hadn't been publicized. It wasn't the kind of information you wanted in common knowledge. But those skills, carefully honed and never forgotten, were about to become very relevant. "Security teams report ready, Captain," James announced. "All access points secured. Dr. Rivera confirms the sensitive cargo is locked down." Sarah nodded, her finger tapping thoughtfully against the armrest of her chair. The ship's security teams were more than they appeared, former Special Forces operators hired specifically for runs like this. Hidden throughout the vessel were weapons caches and tactical gear that wouldn't appear on any manifest. Through the bridge windows, she could see the storm front approaching from the west, massive clouds pregnant with rain and violence. The seas were growing choppier, white caps beginning to appear with greater frequency. Under normal circumstances, the weather would be her primary concern. But the three fast-moving signatures on their radar represented a far more immediate threat. Update from maritime operations, James reported. They're scrambling support, but nearest asset is 2 hours out. He hesitated before adding, they're asking if we want to declare an emergency and request immediate evacuation. Sarah's lips tightened. Evacuation meant abandoning the cargo, leaving life-saving medicines to be stolen or destroyed. Not yet. Implement evasive pattern Bravo. Let's see what we're dealing with first. She opened a secure compartment beneath the main console, removing a small key card. It would access systems that officially didn't exist on a civilian vessel. Military grade, electronic countermeasures, reinforced hull plating, and other surprises for uninvited guests. All hands, this is the captain, she announced over the ship-wide comm. We have possible hostile contacts approaching. All departments implement security protocols immediately. This is not a drill. Throughout the ship, crew members moved with practiced efficiency. Bulkheads were sealed, equipment secured, and defensive positions quietly manned. In the ship's security office, weapons were distributed to trained personnel. The Meridian Dawn was transforming from a simple supply vessel into something else. Entirely a fortress at sea, contacts now visible on visual, James reported grimly. 3 vessels, military-style rigid hull inflatables, heavy weapons visible. He paused, checking another screen. No transponders, no flags. Sarah allowed herself a small, tight smile. Pirates thought they were hunting prey, but they might just find themselves face to face with a predator. Still, her first duty was to her crew and cargo. If they could avoid conflict, she would. Emergency. Broadcast on all frequencies, she ordered. Let them know we're aware of their presence and armed. Sometimes a warning is enough. But even as she spoke, she knew. The pirates hadn't come this far to turn back now. The storm clouds loomed closer, thunder rolling across the waves like distant artillery. Soon rain would reduce visibility and make the seas even more treacherous. It would either work in their favor or make their situation drastically worse. No response to broadcast, James confirmed. They're maintaining course and speed. Intercept. In approximately 20 minutes, Sarah reached for the ship-wide comm once more. All hands, prepare for potential hostile engagement. This is what we've trained for. Remember your procedures, protect each other, and protect the cargo. Good luck. She turned to James, her expression hardening. Activate the satellite beacon. If this goes badly, I want every navy in 1,000 miles to know exactly what happened here. And who to hunt down, she added silently. The pirates were in for a surprise, but as Sarah watched their approach through her binoculars, she couldn't help but wonder if they had surprises of their own. In her experience, pirates bold enough to attack a vessel this size, in these waters, usually had more resources than met the eye. The storm broke overhead, sheets of rain hammering the bridge windows. Through the deluge, Sarah could make out the distinct shapes of the approaching vessels, bouncing across the waves with practiced precision. The hunt was about to begin, but the hunters didn't realize they were sailing into a trap. Commander Jack Shadow Reynolds watched the thermal feed with the focused intensity of a hawk tracking its prey. The pirates' 3 vessels appeared as bright signatures against the dark water, their heat signatures unmistakable even through the strengthening storm. Behind him, 5 of the deadliest warriors ever produced by the U.S. Navy prepared their gear in practiced silence. Target vessels maintaining course, reported Chief Petty Officer Mike Ghost Sullivan, the team's communications specialist. Weather's going to give us good cover for insertion. His fingers danced across the keyboard, updating their tactical display. Local temps dropping with the storm, perfect for thermal advantage. The team had been tracking this particular pirate crew for 21 days. 7 ships taken, 3 civilian crews executed, and intelligence suggesting ties to larger terrorist networks. This wasn't just about piracy anymore. It was about cutting off a supply line of weapons and money that fueled operations across 3 continents. "Run it down," Shadow commanded, and his team gathered around the tactical display. "Pete, you're on overwatch." Lieutenant Pete Hawk Thompson, the team's sniper, nodded silently. His modified SR-25 rifle was already prepared, its scope adjusted for the deteriorating weather conditions. "Marcus and Rico, your entry team Alpha." The 2 SEALs, Marcus Tank, Wilson and Rico, Ortiz, checked their MP7's one final time. They'd been together since Budda's training, moving with the synchronicity of brothers. "Dylan, you're with me on Bravo team." Dylan Doc Mitchell, the team's medic and demolitions expert, continued organizing his medical kit while listening. He'd saved each of their lives at least once over the years. "Ghost, you're our eyes and ears. Keep us connected through this storm," Sullivan acknowledged with a quick tap on his communications gear. The mission had evolved significantly from its original parameters. What started as surveillance of suspected pirate activity had revealed a complex network of illegal operations. The Meridian Dawn wasn't chosen at random. Intelligence suggested the pirates had inside information about its cargo and route. "Satellite feed shows they're running a classic intercept pattern," Ghost reported. "But something's off about their approach. These guys are too coordinated for typical pirates." Shadow had noticed it too. The precision of their formation, the timing of their attack with the approaching storm, it all suggested military training. "Pull up the intel on their previous attacks." The tactical display shifted, showing data from 7 previous hijackings. Each one had been executed with similar precision. No witnesses left, cargo disappeared without a trace, and ships found days later burned and abandoned. "They're not just pirates," Tank observed, his deep voice rumbling. "They're running an operation, which means there's probably a mothership nearby," added, checking the magazine on his sidearm. "Hidden by the storm." Shadow nodded. His team was thinking ahead, seeing the bigger picture. "That's why they were the best. Ghost, expand our sensor range. Look for any vessels holding position within 50 nautical miles." "New wrinkle," Doc announced, looking up from his tablet. "Just decoded some classified intel on the Meridian Dawn's cargo. Those medical supplies, some of it's experimental, military applications, worth a lot more than we thought." The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't going to be a simple boarding action. It was going to be a battle for a prize worth killing for. Shadow moved to the weapons locker, beginning his own final equipment check. "We've got movement," Ghost called out. "Meridian Dawn is initiating evasive maneuvers. Professional pattern. Their captain knows what they're doing." Shadow smiled grimly. The dossier on Captain Chen had been interesting reading. Her background in the Singapore Navy wasn't common knowledge, but it meant they might have an ally on the inside when things got hot. "Time to lock and load," Shadow announced. "Ghost, signal the command carrier. Let them know we're initiating Operation Starlight." Each team member moved with quiet efficiency, donning tactical gear designed for maritime operations. Lightweight, body armor, modified for underwater movement, weapons sealed against salt water, communication systems hardened against electromagnetic interference. "Remember," Shadow said as they gathered for final checks, "we're not just stopping a hijacking, we're cutting off a supply line. These pirates have been feeding weapons and money to terror cells across Southeast Asia. Tonight, that ends." The B team moved to their deployment positions. They'd practiced this hundreds of times, a coordinated underwater insertion from their stealth vessel, using the storm as cover. The pirates would be watching the surface and the air. They wouldn't be looking below. "Hawk, once we breach the surface, you'll have 90 seconds to get into position," Shadow reminded them. Tank, Slash, you'll take the stern. Doc and I will come up midships. Ghost will coordinate from here and handle any electronic warfare. We need... Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the loading bay where they waited. Thunder followed almost immediately. The storm was nearly overhead. Perfect timing. One last thing, Shadow added, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Intel suggests these pirates have military training. Treat them like professionals, not amateurs. They will be ready for a fight. The team checked their rebreathers one final time. Ahead of them, through the open bay doors, dark waves churned beneath an angry sky. In minutes, they would slip beneath those waves, becoming invisible predators in a hostile sea. "Command, this is Ghost," Sullivan transmitted. "SEAL Team Alpha is ready for deployment. Operation Starlight is go." Shadow looked at each member of his team. They'd been through hell together, completed missions that would never appear in any record. But this one was different. This wasn't just about stopping criminals, it was about preventing future atrocities. "Check your corners, watch your backs, and remember, we all go home tonight," Shadow said, his traditional pre-mission words carrying their usual quiet authority. "Let's go hunting." The bay doors opened fully, and one by one, the SEALs slipped into the churning sea. Above them, lightning continued to flash, and thunder rolled across the waves. The storm would hide their approach, mask their movements, and provide cover for what was to come. The hunt was on, but this time, the hunters were about to become the hunted. The first warning shot screamed across the Meridian Dawn's bow, its trace visible even through the sheets of rain. On the bridge, Captain Chen watched as 3 attack boats emerged from the storm's veil, their gunners clearly visible behind mounted. "Weapons! All hands, brace for impact," she commanded through the ship-wide comm. "Security teams, hold positions. Do not, I repeat, do not engage unless directly threatened." The pirates' lead vessel pulled alongside, its hull bouncing against the massive cargo ship's steel plates. Grappling hooks soared upward, catching on the railings. Dark figures began ascending with practiced efficiency, their movements betraying professional military training. "Captain!" James called out urgently. "They're boarding at multiple points. I count at least 15 hostiles, possibly more still, on their boats." Sarah's mind raced through contingencies. Her security teams were in position, but engaging now would risk a bloodbath. These weren't common thugs. Their coordinated approach and tactical gear suggested something far more dangerous. The bridge door exploded inward, knocked off its hinges by a breaching charge. Before the smoke cleared, 4 armed men stormed through. Their leader, a tall figure with a scarred face, moved with the confidence of someone used to taking what he wanted. "Nobody moves," he shouted in accented English. "Hands where we can see them." Sarah raised her hands slowly, noting every detail about the intruders. Their weapons were military-grade, their tactical vests laden with specialized equipment. These weren't opportunistic pirates. This was a professional military operation disguised as piracy. "I am Captain Chen," she announced calmly. "Whatever you want, we can—" "Shut up!" the scarred man cut her off. "I know exactly who you are, Captain." He tapped his radio. "Bridge is secured. Begin sweep of all decks. Find the primary cargo." Throughout the ship, the sounds of combat echoed. Several security team members had engaged, only to be quickly overwhelmed by the pirates' superior numbers and positioning. The storm continued to rage outside, lightning illuminating scenes of violence through the windows. "Listen carefully," the pirate leader addressed the bridge crew. "Cooperate, and you might survive this. Resist." He gestured to one of his men, who fired a burst into the ceiling. "Well, accidents happen in bad weather." Sarah caught James's eye, giving him an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Not yet. The emergency beacon was transmitting their position, and her security teams were falling back to defensive positions around the sensitive cargo. They just needed to buy time. "Status report," The leader barked into his radio. "Lower decks secured," came the response. Some resistance from security handled it. "Searching for target cargo now. Wait." There was a pause. "Sir, we've got something weird here. Their manifest doesn't match what we're finding." The scarred man's eyes narrowed as he looked at Sarah. "You're carrying more than just medical supplies, aren't you, Captain? Military-grade pharmaceuticals, perhaps, experimental treatments." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her mind was working overtime. They knew too much about their cargo. This had to be an inside job. Someone had leaked their manifest en route. Suddenly, the ship's lights flickered. The storm was intensifying, massive waves now battering the vessel. Or was it something else? Sarah thought she caught a glimpse of movement on one of the external camera feeds, a shadow in the water that shouldn't be there. "Sir," another voice crackled over the radio, "we've got a problem in the engine room. Security teams are more organized than we expected. They've barricaded themselves in with some of the cargo." The leader cursed, grabbing Sarah roughly. "Tell your people to stand down, or we start throwing crew members overboard." "I can't contact them," Sarah replied evenly. "You destroyed the ship's internal communications when you took the bridge." It was a lie. There was a backup system. But she needed to maintain the fiction that her crew was acting on their own. Every minute they delayed these men was another minute for help to arrive. A massive explosion rocked the ship. One of the pirates had used too much force trying to breach a secured cargo hold. Alarms blared as damage control systems activated automatically. The leader shoved Sarah aside, moving to check the ship's status displays. "This is taking too long," he growled into his radio. "Begin executing hostages, one every 5 minutes until the security teams surrender." Sarah's heart raced, but she maintained her calm facade. The pirates were getting nervous, making mistakes. They'd expected an easy target and found themselves in an increasingly complex situation. Through the bridge windows, she noticed one of the attack boats was sitting slightly lower in the water than before. A malfunction, or something else. The storm made it difficult to be sure, but she could have sworn she saw movement on its deck. "Sir!" A new voice on the radio, urgent and afraid. "We just lost contact with the rear guard, not responding to radio calls." The leader's expression darkened. He'd obviously run operations like this before, and something wasn't following the usual script. "How many men down there?" "4, sir." "And, sir?" "We found blood, but no bodies." Sarah allowed herself a small smile, quickly hidden. The hunt had begun, but not in the way these pirates expected. Now it was just a matter of surviving long enough to see how it played out. "Nobody leaves the bridge," the leader ordered 2 of his men. "Watch them carefully." He turned to his radio again. "All teams converge on the main cargo hold. Something's not right here." As he left with his remaining man, Sarah caught another glimpse of movement on the security feeds, a shadow moving with purpose through the ship's corridors. The pirates had come hunting for prey, but they'd sailed right into the path of a much more dangerous predator. Thunder boomed overhead, and in the distance Sarah heard the distinct sound of suppressed gunfire. The real battle for the Meridian Dawn was about to begin. The pirates moved through the Meridian Dawn's corridors with methodical precision, herding crew members into the ship's mess hall. Rain hammered against the portholes, and occasional flashes of lightning cast strange shadows through the rectangular windows. In the corner, a young engineer sobbed quietly while an older crewman tried to comfort her. 31, muttered Abbas, the pirate's second-in-command, as he finished his head count. Something wasn't right. The manifest listed 32 crew members. He grabbed the nearest hostage. "Where is the missing crew member?" Nobody answered. The silence was broken only by the storm and the distant sound of waves crashing against the hull. Abbas raised his rifle, pressing it against the hostage's temple. "I won't ask again." "Thompson, he was in the engine room when you attacked," someone finally spoke up. He might have been caught in that explosion. Abbas keyed his radio. "Command, we're missing one crew member, possibly dead in the engine room blast, but verify." He didn't wait for a response before addressing his men. "Search them all again. Phones, weapons, anything they could use to communicate." In the cargo hold, 2 decks below, another group of pirates had discovered something unsettling. The medical supplies were there as expected, but the security measures protecting them were far beyond standard protocol. Heavy magnetic locks, reinforced doors, and what appeared to be military-grade surveillance equipment. "This isn't right," muttered Karim, their technical expert, as he examined the security panel. "These are the same systems used in military installations. What kind of medical supplies need this level of protection?" A sudden noise made them all spin around, weapons raised, nothing but shadows and the creaking of the ship. But something felt off. The hairs on the back of Karim's neck stood up. Years of combat experience had taught him to trust that feeling. "Check those shadows," he ordered. "Something's not—" The lights went out. When they came back on 3 seconds, later one of his men was missing. No sound, no struggle, just gone. The remaining pirates clustered together, backs to each other, scanning the darkness between the cargo containers. "Command, we have a situation," Karim whispered into his radio. Static was his only answer. "Command? Abbas? Anyone?" In the mess hall, Abbas was facing his own problems. The ship's first officer, James Martinez, had been surprisingly compliant during the initial takeover. Too compliant. Now Abbas noticed how the crew seemed to be arranged in a peculiar pattern, with the stronger-looking members near the edges of the group. "Move them," he ordered his men. "Separate the ones that look like trouble." As his men moved forward, James caught the eye of several crew members. They'd been waiting for this. The moment the pirates came within range, chaos erupted. The crew moved with coordinated purpose. These weren't ordinary merchant sailors. Abbas managed to fire a short burst into the ceiling, temporarily freezing the action. "Next shot goes into someone's head!" The crew stopped moving, but their positioning had changed. They now controlled the exits, and 2 of his men were down. "Sir!" The radio crackled to life. "We've got intruders! Professional operators. They're picking us off in the lower decks." The pieces suddenly fell into place. The military-grade security systems, the crew's tactical positioning, the missing crew member. This wasn't just a cargo ship. It was a trap. "Fall back to defensive positions," Abbas commanded. "Get the hostages to the bridge, now." But as his men tried to regain control of the situation, more problems arose. The ship's internal systems began malfunctioning, doors sealed randomly. Communications became increasingly unreliable. And through it all, the storm raged outside, making it impossible to see if anyone was approaching the ship. In the shadows of the cargo hold, a figure watched silently as panic began to spread among the pirates. Everything was going according to plan. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and they didn't even know it yet. Shadow and Doc crouched in a darkened maintenance corridor, water still dripping from their tactical gear. Through their night vision goggles, they watched as pirates scrambled past their position, clearly rattled by the disappearance of their comrades. "Ghost, sitrep," Shadow whispered into his throat mic. The communications specialist's voice crackled back through their earpieces, barely audible above the storm. "Tank and Slash are in position near the engine room. Hawks found a perch, with good coverage of the main deck. I'm seeing 20-plus tangos, but they're starting to cluster. They're spooked." Doc checked his tactical pad, studying the ship's schematics they'd memorized during mission prep. "Most of the crew is being held in the mess hall. 2 guards at each entrance, another 4 inside. But something's odd about their positioning." Shadow nodded. He'd noticed it too. "The crew's arranged tactically. They're trained." He switched channels. "Hawk, what's your read on the bridge situation?" 4 hostiles with the command crew. came the sniper's quiet response. "Captain's playing it smart, keeping them calm, but they're getting twitchy. Weather's working in our favor. They can't see shit out here." A sudden burst of gunfire echoed from below, followed by shouting. "Tank, report!" Shadow commanded. "Sorry, boss," Tank's deep voice replied. "One of them got too close. Had to drop him. But we've got confirmation. These aren't standard pirates." Guy was carrying top-tier gear, had military hand signals. Shadow processed this information, adjusting their strategy. This wasn't just a hijacking anymore. It was a covert military operation disguised as piracy. The question was, who were they really dealing with? "New plan," he decided. "Doc, prep the charges. We're going to use their paranoia against them." He switched channels again. "Ghost, can you access the ship's internal systems?" "Already on it," Ghost replied. "Got partial control of lighting and some security doors. Their tech guy is good, though. Keeps trying to lock me out." "Hawk, maintain overwatch on the bridge. If they start executing hostages, take the shot. Mission compromise, be damned." Shadow checked his weapon, ensuring it was still functioning perfectly despite the seawater. "Tank, start moving toward the mess hall. We're going to orchestrate a little chaos." Doc pulled out several small devices from his tactical pack. Custom-made charges designed to create maximum psychological impact with minimal structural damage. "Where do you want them?" "Strategic points around their patrol routes. When they go off, Ghost will kill the lights. Tank and will use the confusion to clear the mess hall. The pirates will think they're under attack from all sides. And the bridge?" Doc asked, already preparing the first charge. "That's where it gets interesting." Shadow smiled grimly. "I noticed something about their patrol patterns. They're protecting the bridge and the main cargo hold, but they're neglecting the maintenance shafts. Classic military blind spot. Too focused on standard entry points. The plan was risky. If any element went wrong, the pirates might start executing hostages. But Shadow had seen enough to know they needed to act fast. These weren't opportunistic criminals who would cut and run when things got tough. They were professionals with a mission, which made them far more dangerous. "Ghost, time check on that approaching storm cell. 20 minutes until it hits full force. Visibility will be near zero." "Perfect." Shadow checked his gear one final time. "Doc, plant those charges. Everyone else get ready. In 20 minutes. We're going to show these guys why you don't fuck with Navy SEALs." As Doc moved out to begin placing the charges, Shadow studied his tactical display. Years of experience had taught him that the most dangerous moments in any operation were when the enemy realized they were trapped. These pirates were about to have that realization, and their reaction would determine how many people survived. The next hour, through his night vision goggles, he watched another group of pirates hurry past, their movements becoming more erratic, less disciplined. Fear was setting in. Soon, that fear would turn to panic, and panic would make them make mistakes. The storm grew stronger outside, thunder rolling across the waves like nature's own war drums. In the distance, lightning illuminated the attacking boats, now sitting unnaturally low in the water, their hulls subtly sabotaged during the team's initial approach. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and they didn't even know it yet. But first, Shadow needed to ensure the crew's survival, secure that sensitive cargo, and figure out who these pirates really were working for, all in a day's work for a Navy SEAL. First Officer James Martinez hadn't survived 15 years of high-risk maritime operations by being careless. As he sat among the crew in the mess hall, his trained eye caught every detail: the pirates' patrol patterns, their radio protocols, the way they held their weapons. These weren't common criminals. They moved like special forces operators. Next to him, Chief Engineer Rodriguez was slowly, imperceptibly, sliding a piece of metal from his sleeve. The pirates had searched them all, but they hadn't recognized that some of the crew's uniforms had been specially modified for situations exactly like this. "They're getting nervous," Rodriguez whispered, his lips barely moving. "The missing team in the lower decks has them spooked." James gave a slight nod. Through the portholes, lightning flashed, illuminating the mess hall in stark bursts. He counted again, 18 pirates visible, probably more elsewhere in the ship. But something was hunting them in the shadows, and James had a pretty good idea what it was. The ship suddenly lurched, causing several pirates to stumble. The storm was intensifying, but James noticed something else, the subtle change in the engine's vibration. Someone had accessed the secondary control systems, making minute adjustments to the ship's stabilizers. "Check the engine room again," one of the pirates ordered, his accent distinctly Eastern European. "Something's not right with the ship's movement." As two pirates moved toward the door, James caught the eye of Sarah Chen's personal security officer, Thompson, who had managed to blend in with the regular crew. Thompson gave an almost imperceptible nod. He'd recognized the same military precision in their captor's movements. "Sir," a voice crackled over the pirate's radio, "we've lost contact with the engine room team, and the security feeds are showing—" "Wait, what the hell was that?" The lead pirate in the mess hall grabbed his radio. "Report, what did you see?" Only static answered. James felt the tension in the room spike. The pirates were trained professionals, but something was systematically dismantling their operation, and they couldn't fight what they couldn't see. Fear was beginning to override their training. In the corner, Dr. Rivera, the ship's medical officer, continued her quiet work. While pretending to comfort injured crew members, she was actually passing crucial information through hand signals, signals that only specially trained personnel would recognize. The number of pirates, their positions, their apparent weaknesses. "They're carrying modified G-36X, Thompson whispered, his voice barely a breath. "German manufacturing, but with custom modifications. These guys have serious backing." The ship's lights flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, James saw several crew members shift positions slightly. They were setting up for something, following a protocol that had been drilled into them during specialized training sessions that never appeared in any official logs. Captain Chen hadn't just prepared her ship for pirate attacks. She'd assembled a crew capable of dealing with military-grade threats. Most of them had background in various special forces or intelligence services, their merchant marine credentials merely a cover for their real qualifications. A distant thud reverberated through the hull, followed by muffled shouting. The pirate's radio crackled again. "Contact! We have contact in Sector 4. Multiple hostiles. They're using our tactics against us." The lead pirate in the mess hall grabbed one of the crew members. "What else is on this ship? Who are you people really carrying?" Before anyone could answer, the lights went out completely. In the darkness, James heard the distinct sound of metacarpal bones being broken. Thompson was making his move. When emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds later, 2 pirates were down, and the crew had shifted formation again. "Nobody move!" the lead pirate shouted, his weapon tracking across the room. But James could hear the edge of panic in his voice. These men had come prepared for a merchant vessel crew, not this level of resistance. Through the portholes, James caught a glimpse of movement on the outer deck, a shadow moving with deliberate purpose through the rain. The cavalry had arrived, and now it was just a matter of surviving the next few minutes. "Sir," another voice on the radio, this one shaking with barely controlled fear. "We found Alexei's team in the lower cargo hold. They're dead, no gunshots, no wounds. Their necks." The lead pirate's face hardened. "Fall back to defensive positions. Get the high-value hostages to the bridge, now." As several pirates moved to grab specific crew members, James allowed himself a small smile. In their panic, they hadn't noticed that the crew's seemingly random movements had actually positioned their strongest fighters nearest to the pirates' likely escape routes. The hunt was entering its final phase, and these pirates were about to learn a hard lesson about appearances being deceiving. The real question was, how many people would survive the next hour of this deadly game of cat and mouse? Hawk adjusted his position on the rain-slicked upper deck, his SR-25 rifle steady despite the rolling waves. Through his scope, enhanced with the latest thermal imaging technology, he tracked the movements of panic-stricken pirates rushing between positions. The storm worked in his favor, the driving rain masking any subtle movements he needed to make. "Shadow, I've got multiple tangos converging on the bridge," he whispered into his comm. "They're moving hostages. Looks like they're consolidating their position." Below deck, Shadow and Doc pressed themselves against a wall as footsteps thundered past their position. The pirates were abandoning their systematic search patterns, falling back to more defensive positions. Fear was making them predictable. Ghost, status on ship systems. Shadow's voice was barely a whisper. "I've got about 60% control," Ghost replied through their earpieces. "Their tech guy is good, keeps trying to counter my access, but I can give you darkness when you need it." Through the ship's corridors, Tank and Slash moved like wraiths, their years of training evident in every silent step. They'd already eliminated 3 pirates who'd strayed too far from their groups, hiding the bodies in ways that would only add to the others' growing paranoia. "Boss," Tank's deep voice rumbled quietly in their comms, "we found something interesting on one of the bodies. High-end tactical gear, but the serial numbers have been professionally removed. This isn't random. Pirate equipment." Shadow processed this information as he watched another group of pirates hurry past their hidden position. The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture. "Ghost, any update on that background check we requested?" "Still waiting on full confirmation, but preliminary data suggests ties to Eastern European private military contractors. These guys aren't just pirates, they're mercenaries working for someone with serious resources." The ship pitched suddenly, a massive wave crashing against its hull. The storm was intensifying, just as predicted. Shadow checked his tactical display, noting the positions of his team members. They were in perfect position for the next phase. "Hawk, how's our exit route looking?" Through the driving rain, Hawk scanned the pirate vessels still tethered to the Meridian Dawn. "Their boats are taking on water just like we planned. They'll notice soon. When they do, they'll get desperate," Shadow finished. "Ghost, time to make our visitors uncomfortable. Execute Echo Protocol." Throughout the ship, carefully planted, charges began to detonate. Not explosives, but specialized devices designed to create confusion and terror. Smoke began seeping through ventilation systems. Lights flickered in irregular patterns. Random doors, sealed and unsealed. Multiple contacts breaking formation, Hawk reported, tracking the chaos through his scope. "They're starting to bunch. Up, getting sloppy." Shadow gave a grim smile in the darkness. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The pirates' military training was actually working against them now. They were responding to the chaos by falling back on standard tactical procedures, making them even more predictable. "Sir," one of the pirates' voices carried clearly through the corridor. "The boats, they're sinking! Someone scuttled them!" The panic in his voice was evident. These men had just realized they were trapped on a ship that was quickly becoming their tomb, with an unseen enemy systematically hunting them down. Lightning flashed outside, and in that brief illumination, Shadow caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. One of the pirates was carrying specialized breaching equipment, the kind used to cut through reinforced vault doors. "Ghost, get me everything you can on that cargo thereafter. Whatever's in those containers, it's worth enough for someone to send a professional military team after it." As if in response to his words, gunfire erupted from somewhere above, short, controlled bursts that spoke of professional training. The pirates were done playing nice. They were going to get what they came for, or they were going to start executing hostages. All teams, maintain tactical silence, Shadow ordered. Let them wear themselves out. We strike on my mark. He checked his watch. Ghost, be ready with ship-wide darkness in 4 minutes. Through the steel corridors of the Meridian Dawn, 6 highly trained Navy SEALs moved into their final positions. Years of training, countless missions, and an unwavering brotherhood had prepared them for moments exactly like this. The storm raged outside, but inside the ship, an even deadlier storm was about to break loose. The pirate leader, Vadim, paced the bridge like a caged animal, his scarred face illuminated by intermittent flashes of lightning. 6 of his men were already missing, radio silence their only epitaph. Another 3 had been found with broken necks, hidden in ways that spoke of professional efficiency. How long until the vault-breaching equipment is ready? He barked into his radio, his accent thickening with stress. 10 minutes, came Karim's shaky response. But, sir, we lost Victor's team. They were guarding the approach to the cargo hold and just disappeared. A sudden explosion rocked the ship, another of the mysterious charges detonating somewhere in the lower decks. Captain Chen watched Vadim's reaction carefully, noting how his hand tightened on his weapon. The man was starting to crack. "Sir," another voice on the radio, pitched high with barely controlled panic. "The boats. They're almost underwater. We're trapped here." Vadim grabbed the nearest hostage, a young navigation officer, and pressed his pistol against the man's temple. "Tell your people to stop resisting, Captain, or we start reducing the crew count." Sarah Chen remained impassive, but her mind was racing. The pirates' body language had changed significantly in the past 20 minutes. Their movements were becoming erratic, their formation losing cohesion. They were trained professionals, but something out there in the darkness was systematically destroying their confidence. "I have no control over what's happening," she replied, calmly. "But I suggest you consider your options carefully. Whatever you came for, it's not worth—" Another explosion cut her off, this one closer. The lights flickered ominously. "Teams 2 and 3 converge on the cargo hold," Vadim ordered into his radio. "Team 4, begin executing hostages in the mess hall, 1 every 5 minutes until..." The bridge plunged into total darkness. When emergency lighting sputtered back on 3 seconds later, 2 more of Vadim's men were gone, simply vanished into the shadows. The remaining pirates clustered together, their weapons pointed outward in shaking hands. "They're hunting us," one of them whispered, "like we're fucking prey." Below decks, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The pirates in the mess hall had begun shoving crew members against walls, their previous professional demeanor cracking under the strain of unseen threats. "Nobody fucking moves," screamed Abbas, his finger tightening on his trigger as shadows seemed to shift in the corners of his vision. "The next person who even breathes wrong gets..." The ship's horn suddenly blasted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. In the moment of disorientation, something moved through the darkness. When the echo faded, Abbas was gone. "Where is he?" one of the pirates shouted, his voice cracking. "Where the fuck did he go?" Back on the bridge, Vadim received the report he'd been dreading. The breaching equipment team had reached the cargo hold, only to find the reinforced door already open. Inside, the containers had been emptied. Someone had moved the cargo during the chaos. "Sir," Karim's voice shook through the radio. We found Team 2. They're all dead, no gunshots, no blood, just broken. Someone is in here with us. Someone who knows what they're doing." Vadim's composure finally shattered. He fired. A burst into the bridge ceiling, sending sparks cascading down. "Everyone fall back to the bridge. Now, bring any hostages you can grab. The rest are expendable." But even as he gave the order, another sound cut through the storm, the distinct whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of approaching helicopters. Captain Chen allowed herself a small smile. The pirates had just realized what she'd known all along. They weren't the hunters here. They were the hunted, and their time was running out. Shadow moved through the darkness like a ghost, his night vision giving him a clear view of two pirates backing nervously down the corridor. Behind him, Doc followed with equal stealth, both men moving with the fluid grace of predators stalking. "Elude their prey. Ghost, status on the cargo," Shadow whispered into his comm. Thompson and his security team managed to move it during the blackouts. It's secured in the secondary hold. But boss, you need to know what we're really dealing with here. A burst of lightning illuminated the corridor through a porthole, and Shadow pressed himself into a shadow, becoming virtually invisible. The pirates passed within inches, never noticing the death that lurked beside them. "Make it quick, Ghost." "The cargo? It's not just medical supplies. We're talking about experimental military-grade biotech, worth billions on the black market. No wonder these guys came with professional backup." Doc's hand signal caught Shadow's attention. Movement ahead. 3 more pirates, these ones moving with more purpose, heading toward the bridge. They were carrying the breaching equipment. "Hawk, you seeing this?" Shadow whispered. "Affirmative," came the sniper's voice. "Got eyes on the bridge too. They're getting desperate up there. The leader's starting to lose it." Through the ship's corridors, Tank and Slash were executing their own silent approach. They'd already eliminated 4 pirates, using their close-quarters combat training to ensure no shots were fired. No alerts were raised. "Boss." Tank's deep voice rumbled quietly in their earpieces. "Found something on their comms. They're running a secondary frequency, getting orders from someone off-ship." Shadow processed this information as he watched another group of pirates hurry past their position. "Ghost, can you tap that frequency?" "Working on it. But there's something else. Those helicopters we're hearing, they're not ours. Wrong sound. Signature. Someone else is coming to this party." The ship pitched suddenly in the storm, and in the distance they heard panicked shouting. More pirates, discovering their escape boats, were now underwater. The trap was fully sprung. "All teams, execute Phase 3. Shadow commanded. "Ghost, kill the lights in sections, Charlie through Echo. Hawk, if anyone on that bridge starts executing hostages, you take the shot. Silence be damned." As if choreographed, darkness rolled through the ship section by section. In the mess hall, Tank and Slash moved like wraiths through the shadows. The sounds that followed were brief, efficient, the wet snap of vertebrae, the soft thud of bodies being lowered to the floor. "Mess hall clear," Tank reported. 11 hostages secured, moving to next objective. Shadow and Doc approached the cargo hold where the pirates had discovered their precious cargo missing. 3 armed men stood guard, their nervous trigger fingers making them more dangerous than their trained counterparts. "Taking them," Shadow breathed into his comm. The next 10 seconds were a ballet of violence, perfectly executed CQC techniques honed through years of training. When it was done, 3 more pirates lay still on the deck. "Ghost, what's the status on that secondary frequency?" "Breaking the encryption now. But boss, those helicopters are getting closer. 10 minutes out, max." Through his night vision, Shadow watched as more pirates began congregating around the bridge, following their leader's panicked orders. They were gathering for a final stand, probably planning to use their high-value hostages as bargaining chips. "Time to end this," Shadow decided. "All teams converge on the bridge. Ghost, stand by for full blackout. Hawk, paint your targets." In the darkness of the ship's corridors, 4 Navy SEALs began their final approach. Above them, a highly trained sniper adjusted his scope, marking his priorities. And in the ship's command center, their communications expert prepared to plunge the vessel into total darkness. The pirates had come hunting for prey worth billions. Instead, they'd found themselves trapped in a floating coffin with some of the deadliest predators on Earth. Now it was time to close the lid. Ghost's voice cut through the comm channel with unusual urgency. "Shadow, stop everything. We've got a serious problem." Shadow froze mid-movement, years of experience telling him something was very wrong. "Talk to me." "I just decoded their secondary frequency." "These aren't pirates, boss. They're Russian Spetsnaz operators running a deep cover mission. And the cargo? It's not what we were told. Through his night vision goggles, Shadow watched as more armed men converged on the bridge. But now he was seeing their movements differently. Who? The precision, the formations. How had they missed it? Ghost, what's the cargo? According to their comms, we're sitting on top of a next-generation biological weapon, something called Project Oracle. The medical supplies are just cover. That's why the security systems are military-grade. The ship lurched in the storm as Shadow processed this information. The crew? That's the other thing. Ghost's voice was grim. Some of them aren't crew at all. I'm picking up encrypted transmissions from inside the ship. Chinese military intelligence. They're running their own op. As if confirming his words, gunfire suddenly erupted from the mess hall, but not from their team's weapons. Through the ship's security feeds, Shadow watched as several crew members produced hidden weapons, engaging both pirates and their fellow shipmates. It's a triple cross, Shadow realized. The Russians sent their team in as pirates to steal the bioweapon. The Chinese had agents embedded in the crew to intercept it. And we're caught in the middle. That's not all. Hawk's voice joined the channel. Those helicopters approaching, Russian Special Forces carriers. They're coming to extract their team and the weapon. Shadow's mind raced through options. Their mission parameters had just shifted dramatically. This wasn't a simple counter-piracy operation anymore. They were in the middle of an international black op that could spark a major conflict. Ghost, get me a secure line to command. Now. But before Ghost could respond, more complications arose. Captain Chen's voice came over the ship's intercom, speaking in a coded phrase that made several more crew members spring into action. These ones moved with American military precision. Oh shit, Ghost breathed. Boss, you're not going to believe this. Captain Chen, she's CIA. This whole thing was a setup, a sting operation to expose who would come after the weapon. But it's spinning out of control. The ship was now a powder keg. Russian Special Forces masquerading as pirates. Chinese agents embedded in the crew. CIA operatives running a sting. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a biological weapon that could reshape modern warfare. Multiple contacts, Hawk suddenly called out. Chinese vessels approaching from the east. Fast attack craft. 5 minutes out at most. Shadow made his decision. All teams, new mission parameters. We secure that weapon at all costs. Nobody gets off this ship with it. Not the Russians, not the Chinese, not even our own people. The risk is too high. Sir, Tank's voice was hesitant. That puts us against 3 different Special Forces teams, plus whatever other surprises are waiting. Then we better work fast, Shadow replied, checking his ammunition. Ghost, kill every system on this ship. Comms, lights, everything. Hawk, as soon as those helicopters are in range, disable them. Non-lethal if you can, but keep them off this ship. The stakes had just risen exponentially. What started as a counter-piracy operation had become a desperate mission to prevent. A biological weapon from falling into the wrong hands. Any hands. One last thing, Ghost added. That storm... It's about to get much worse. We've got about 30 minutes before this whole area becomes a floating hell. Shadow allowed himself a grim smile. Then we better make them count. All teams, execute on my mark. We end this now. Throughout the ship, the SEAL team readied themselves for what was about to become the fight of their lives. Against the clock, against the storm, and against some of the deadliest special operations forces in the world. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. Shadow moved through the maintenance shaft with lethal grace, his mind processing the tactical nightmare they'd stumbled into. Behind him, Doc checked his specialized gear. They might need both his medical skills and demolition expertise before. This was over. Ghost, give me positions on all players. Shadow whispered into his comm. Russians have fortified the bridge and the main corridor leading to their assumed cargo location. Chinese agents are split into 3 groups, 2 moving toward the bridge, 1 heading for the real cargo. CIA team is... Ghost paused. They're moving to the engine room. They're going to try to disable the ship. Lightning flashed through the portholes as Shadow considered their options. Disabling the ship might prevent anyone from stealing the weapon, but in this storm, it would also be a death sentence for everyone aboard. Hawk, status on those incoming vessels. Russian helicopters 3 minutes out, Chinese attack craft 7 minutes. Storm's getting worse. They'll have to board soon or miss their window completely. Through the ship's corridors, Tank and Slash were moving to intercept one of the Chinese teams. They'd already encountered 2 of them, former Chinese special forces, now operating under deep cover. The resulting silent close-quarters battle had been intense. "Sir," Tank's deep voice rumbled quietly, "we found their backup communications gear. They're calling in more assets. This is going to become a floating war zone." Shadow reached a junction in the maintenance shaft, checking his tactical display. They needed to secure that weapon before the situation deteriorated further. But with 3 elite forces converging on their position, traditional tactics wouldn't work. "New plan," he decided. "Doc, prep the ship's fire suppression system. Ghost, be ready to seal all watertight compartments on my mark. We're going to channel them where we want them." The ship pitched violently in the growing storm. Somewhere above, they heard the distinct sound of fists meeting flesh. Another silent confrontation between the hidden forces on board. "Movement ahead," Doc warned. 2 targets, Chinese gear moving fast. Shadow held up his fist, signaling a halt. Through his night vision, he watched as the Chinese operators passed below their position in the maintenance shaft. Their weapons and equipment were top of the line, confirming these weren't ordinary agents. "All teams, be advised," Ghost's voice carried tension. "Russians are starting to execute their fail-safe protocols. They're rigging breaching charges throughout the ship. If they can't have the weapon, they'll scuttle the whole vessel." The situation was deteriorating faster than anticipated. Shadow had trained for complex operations, but this was unprecedented. 3 rival Special Forces teams, a biological weapon, and a storm that threatened to kill them all. "Tank, Slash, secure the engine room. We can't let the CIA disable this." "Ship, Doc, you're with me. We're heading to the real cargo location." "Hawk, already on it, boss," the sniper replied. "Got eyes on the Russian demo team. Just say the word." The ship's internal communications suddenly crackled to life. Captain Chen's voice, but now dropping all pretense of being a merchant captain. "All U.S. personnel, be advised. Chinese fast attack craft are carrying additional QBZ-95 equipped boarding teams. Russians have attack helicopters incoming with Spetsnaz reinforcements. Primary package must not leave this vessel." Shadow checked his weapon and nodded to Doc. "Ghost, implement containment protocol Delta. Seal all compartments except our planned. Rote, everyone else, weapons free, but remember, we need some of these people alive for questioning." Throughout the ship, the sound of bulkheads sealing echoed like thunder. The trap was set. Now they just had to spring it before 3 of the world's most elite Special Forces teams turned the Meridian Dawn into a floating graveyard. The storm hit the Meridian Dawn with apocalyptic fury, massive waves crashing over the bow. In his sniper's perch, Hawk struggled to maintain his position as the ship pitched violently. "Incoming!" His voice crackled through the comms. "First, Russian helicopter attempting approach. These guys are either brave or crazy. Flying in this weather is suicide." Through the driving rain, the sleek Mi-17 helicopter appeared like a ghost, its rotors fighting against the gale force winds. Inside the ship, Shadow and Doc could hear the thunderous roar of its approach, even through the steel hull. "Ghost, what's the status on those charges the Russians planted?" "Located 12 devices throughout the ship. They're on a synchronized trigger. If they blow them all, this ship breaks in half." Lightning split the sky as Shadow and Doc approached. The real cargo hold. Ahead of them, they could hear the sounds of combat. The Chinese team had engaged the CIA operatives protecting the weapon. "Tank, Slash, report!" Shadow commanded. Engine room secured. Tank's voice was heavy with exertion. Had to subdue 3 CIA operators. These guys weren't playing around. They were ready to sink us all. The ship lurched again, and somewhere, above, they heard the distinctive sound of grappling hooks hitting the deck. The Russians were attempting their boarding operation despite the storm. Multiple targets dropping on the port side, Hawk reported. Second helicopter moving into position on starboard. Wait. There was a pause. Chinese vessels are launching. Oh, boarding teams, this is about to get really crowded. Shadow motioned to Doc, indicating a different approach route. They could hear more combat ahead. The distinctive sound of Chinese QBZ-95 rifles exchanging fire with Russian weapons. Ghost, implement sonic warfare protocol, Shadow ordered. Give them something else to think about. Throughout the ship, high-pitched frequencies began broadcasting through the internal speakers. Not loud enough to incapacitate, but disorienting enough to throw off trained operators who relied on their senses. Boss! Ghost's voice carried urgency. Picking up. New signals. Chinese have underwater teams approaching. They're not just coming from above. The situation was deteriorating by the second. 3 elite forces, all converging on their position, while the storm threatened to tear the ship apart. And somewhere, in the middle of it all, was a biological weapon that could change the face of modern warfare. All teams, fall back to position Bravo, Shadow commanded. Doc, prep the countermeasures. If we can't hold that weapon, we destroy it. Sir, Doc's voice was grim, if we destroy it in this enclosed space. Better than letting it fall into the wrong hands. Lightning flashed again, and through a nearby porthole, they saw the Chinese fast attack craft emerging from the storm like hungry sharks. Their deck guns were manned, despite the impossible weather. New contacts, Hawk's voice rose with urgency. Third helicopter approaching from the stern, different silhouette. Chinese Z-9. They're bringing in their heavy hitters. Shadow checked. His tactical display. The Russians had control of the upper decks, the Chinese were coming from multiple angles, and the CIA team was still trying to scuttle the ship. It was time to end this. Ghost, execute Protocol Omega. Seal all hatches, vent the lower decks. Tank, get to the secondary position. Doc, plant those charges. Hawk, paint your targets. On my mark, we're going to show these teams why. You don't corner Navy SEALs. The storm raged outside, but inside the Meridian Dawn, an even deadlier storm was about to break loose. 3 of the world's most elite special forces teams were about to learn a hard lesson about underestimating SEAL team operators. All teams, ready? Shadow asked, checking his weapon one final time. The responses came back immediately, each operator's, voice steady despite the chaos around them. Ready. Hawk, ready. Tank and ready. Doc, ready. Ghost Shadow allowed himself a grim smile. Then let's remind them who rules these waters. All hell broke loose at once. The Russians breached from above, rappelling through the storm with practiced precision. Chinese boarding teams surged up from their fast attack craft. And caught between them, the CIA operators moved to their final defensive positions around the weapon. Now! Shadow's command cut through the chaos. The trap was sprung. Ghost killed all lighting throughout the ship. In the same instant, the fire suppression system activated in selected corridors, filling them with thick, obscuring fog. The SEAL team's night vision equipment gave them a decisive advantage. Multiple targets port side, Hawk reported, his rifle cracking with precision despite the rolling deck. 2 down, Chinese boarding team redirecting. Through the darkness, Shadow and Doc moved like wraiths. 2 Russian operators appeared ahead, their own night vision equipment glowing faintly. The resulting close-quarters fight was swift and brutal, years of SEAL hand-to-hand training proving superior. Tank, status? Shadow demanded, already moving to his next position. Heavy resistance in the engine room, Tank's deep voice replied, punctuated by the sound of combat. These CIA boys don't quit easy. Took a hit, but he's operational. The ship pitched violently, sending unsecured equipment crashing through the corridors. Above deck, the Russian helicopters fought against the storm, their spotlight beams cutting uselessly through the rain and fog. Chinese underwater team breaching in Sector 7, Ghost reported. They're using shaped charges on the hull. Shadow had anticipated this. Doc, initiate counter-breach protocols. Doc's pre-planted charges detonated beneath the waterline, creating a temporary but violent surge that disrupted the Chinese divers' approach. The message was clear. Every approach had been anticipated and prepared for. "Boss, we've got a problem." Hawk's voice carried urgency. "Russian demo team is making a push for their charges. If they reach the detonator, Ghost, seal bulkheads in sectors 3 through 5. Intercept that demo team. Everyone else, converge on the package. We end this now." The Russians had reached the bridge, engaging the CIA operators in close-quarters combat. Through the ship's security feeds, Ghost watched as some of the world's most elite Special Forces operators fought for control of the command center. "Multiple casualties on the bridge," he reported. "Captain Chen is... Wait, she just took down 3 Russians in hand-to-hand. She's better than her file suggested." Shadow and Doc reached the real cargo hold, only to find themselves caught in a 3-way firefight. Chinese operators had breached from one side, Russians from another, while CIA personnel held the center position around the weapon. "Doc, prep the failsafe," Shadow ordered, taking cover as rounds sparked off steel walls. "If we can't hold it," "Understood, boss. Rather destroy it than let it fall into the wrong hands." The battle intensified. In the confined space of the ship's corridors, it became a brutal contest of close-quarters combat skills. Every operator present was among their nation's elite, turning the Meridian Dawn into a deadly proving ground of Special Forces tactics. "Russian helicopter attempting another insertion," Hawk reported. His rifle cracked once. "Scratch that. Pilot's reconsidering his options." Shadow engaged 2 Chinese operators simultaneously, the fight becoming a blur of advanced combat techniques. These weren't typical soldiers. They were China's best, and it showed in every move they made. "Boss!" Ghost's voice carried alarm. "Russian demo team is starting their countdown. We've got 3 minutes before they scuttle the ship." The storm reached its peak fury, massive waves crashing over the deck. The Meridian Dawn groaned under the assault, her steel hull pushed to its limits, and within her corridors, some of the world's deadliest operators fought for control of a weapon that could reshape the balance of global power. The hunt had become a war, and time was running out. Tank and Slash moved through the flooded lower deck, water sloshing at their knees. The Russian demolition team had sealed themselves in the engine room, their countdown ticking away. Every step had to be perfect. One wrong move, and the entire ship would break apart in the storm. 2 minutes, 40 seconds. Ghost's voice was tense in their earpieces. "Russian team is in the auxiliary control room. They're rigging secondary charges." "Copy that," Tank replied, his massive frame moving with surprising stealth. Beside him, Slash pressed a hand against his wounded side. The CIA operator's bullet had grazed him, but hadn't slowed him down. Suddenly, movement ahead, shadows in the water. Chinese combat divers had breached the hull, their rebreathers, barely visible in the darkness. The fight was instant and savage, bubbles and blood clouding the knee-deep water. "Contact!" Slash grunted, engaging one of the divers in close-quarters combat. His attacker was highly trained, but Slash had spent years perfecting underwater fighting techniques. The outcome was brutally decisive. Tank dealt with 2 more divers, his enormous strength proving decisive in the confined space. Path clear, moving to engine room breach point. Above them, through the deck plating, they could hear the sounds of intense combat. Shadow and Doc were engaged with multiple hostile teams, fighting to secure the biological weapon. The ship groaned around them as another massive wave hit. 2 minutes, Ghost warned. Russian demo team is preparing final arming sequence. Tank and Slash reached the engine room's reinforced door. Behind it, they could hear voices speaking rapid-fire Russian, the demo team coordinating their final preparations. Breach charges set, Slash reported, placing shaped charges at key points around the door. Ready on your mark, Tank. Ghost, kill power to this section on my command, Tank ordered. Slash, you take left, I'll take right. These guys are Spetsnaz. They won't go down easy. 1 minute 45 seconds, Ghost reminded them. Tank took a deep breath. Execute! The lights died. The breaching charges detonated with precise force, and Tank and Slash moved in like machines, years of training and countless missions culminating in this moment. The Russians were ready, but they hadn't expected this level of coordination. The fight was fast, brutal, and absolutely silent. No gunfire. At this range, with volatile engine equipment around them, bullets could be catastrophic. Instead, it was all tactical hand-to-hand, each side employing their most lethal close quarters. Techniques? 1 minute? Ghost's voice was urgent. Tank grappled with the Russian team leader, both men trading devastating strikes. These weren't ordinary Spetsnaz. They were their elite of their elite, and it showed in every counter, every move. Slash, despite his wound, engaged 2 operators simultaneously. His style was different from Tank's. Where the larger SEAL used power, Slash employed speed and precision. The Russians fell, but not before one of them managed to trigger an alarm. 30 seconds. Tank, Slash, get that detonator. The Russian leader, blood streaming from his nose, made a final desperate move toward the control panel. Tank intercepted him with crushing force, but the Russian managed to slam his hand down on the emergency scuttle control. No! Slash dove for the panel, his fingers flying over the controls. Ghost, I need override codes now. 15 seconds. Through their comms, they could hear Shadow engaging more hostiles above. The entire ship had become a battleground with 3 elite forces fighting for control while the storm raged around them. Ghost, tell me you've got something, Tank shouted, securing the last Russian operator. Working on it. Wait, got it. Transmitting override sequence now. Slash input the codes with lightning speed, his fingers dancing across the blood-smeared keypad. Above them, the ship pitched violently, threatening to throw them all off their feet. 5 seconds. Come on, Slash muttered, entering the final sequence. The timer stopped at 1 second remaining. For a moment, the only sound was the storm and their heavy breathing. Charges disarmed, Ghost confirmed. Engine room secure. Tank looked at the defeated Russian operators, then at his partner. Good work, brother, but their relief was short-lived. Through the ship's intercoms, they heard Shadow's urgent voice. All teams converge on the bridge. They're making their final push for the weapon. This ends now. Tank and Slash shared a look, then moved with purpose toward the exit. The battle for the engine room was won, but the war for the Meridian Dawn wasn't over yet. The bridge of the Meridian Dawn had become a war zone. Captain Chen, now revealed as a senior CIA operative, stood back-to-back with Shadow, both of them engaging multiple Russian and Chinese Special Forces operators in close-quarters combat. Doc worked frantically at a console trying to prevent the weapon from being remotely activated. Hawk, status, Shadow commanded, ducking under a Russian's knife strike before countering with a devastating combination. Multiple targets neutralized on the upper deck, the sniper reported through heavy static. But both Chinese helicopters are holding position. They're waiting for something. A Chinese operative charged Chen, but her CIA training showed. She dropped him with a precise series of strikes that would have impressed any Special Forces instructor. They're waiting for confirmation that the weapon is secured, she explained, moving to engage another attacker. If we can't have it, they'll sink us all. Lightning flashed through the bridge windows as Shadow took down 2 more Russians. These were Spetsnaz's best, and every engagement was like fighting a mirror, each side anticipating the other's moves, countering with devastating precision. "Ghost, where's my backup?" Shadow demanded, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Tank and Slash are 2 decks below, fighting through heavy resistance. Chinese wet team made another breach. They're trying to flood the lower levels. Doc's voice cut through the chaos. "We've got a problem. They're initiating the weapon's fail-safe sequence. If they can't steal it, they're going to release it right here." The bridge door exploded inward as more Chinese operators breached through, their elite status evident in every movement. Shadow and Chen found themselves forced apart, each engaging multiple opponents in the confined space. "Hawk, take the shot!" Shadow ordered. The sniper's rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times. Through the bridge windows, they saw the Chinese helicopter pilots suddenly slump over their controls, their aircraft veering away into the storm. But the victory was short-lived. The Russian team leader, Vadim, appeared at the secondary entrance, holding what looked like a remote detonator. "Nobody move," he commanded in perfect English. "The next sequence activates the weapon. Perhaps you'd like to see what it does." Shadow froze, calculating angles, options, risks. Chen was closest to Vadim, but 3 Chinese operators still had her pinned down. Doc was working frantically at the console, trying to prevent the weapon's activation, and somewhere below, Tank and Slash were fighting their way up through elite opposition. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Chen said, her voice steady despite the blood running down her arm. "That weapon isn't what you think it is." "No," Vadim smiled coldly, "it's exactly what we think it is. The perfect offensive tool. A biological agent that can target specific genetic markers. Imagine a weapon that can eliminate your enemies while leaving your own people untouched." Shadow caught Doc's subtle hand signal. The medic had done something at the console, something the Russians hadn't noticed, but they needed more time. "And you think you can control it?" Shadow asked, keeping Vadim talking. "A weapon like that has a way of turning on its masters. We've spent years," Vadim began, but suddenly his eyes widened. Through his earpiece he was receiving urgent information, his face contorted with rage. "The engine room! What have you done?" That moment of distraction was all they needed. Chen moved first, her CIA hand-to-hand training making her nearly invisible in the confined space. Shadow was right behind her as Doc initiated his console's final sequence. The fight that followed was brutal and swift. Vadim was exceptional, his Spetsnaz training evident in every counter, every strike. But he was facing 2 of the world's most elite operators, and his team was already decimated. "Weapon disarmed," Doc shouted triumphantly. "Containment protocols activated." Vadim made one last desperate move, pulling a hidden blade. But Shadow had trained for exactly this scenario. The Russians' technique was perfect, but the SEALs was better. The fight ended with Vadim unconscious, his own knife inches from his throat. "Bridge secured," Shadow reported, his breathing heavy. "Ghost, give me a status report. Tank and Slash have cleared the lower decks. Chinese forces are retreating. To their remaining vessels, Russian helicopters are bugging out due to the storm." "We did it, boss. We actually did it." Chen moved to the console, checking Doc's work. "Weapon is completely neutralized," she confirmed. "Good thing, too. If they knew what it really was." Shadow looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "That's classified," she smiled grimly. "But let's just say today you helped prevent something much worse than a biological weapon from falling into the wrong hands." Through the bridge windows, they could see the storm beginning to clear. The Meridian Dawn had survived, though she bore the scars of the battle that had raged within her hull. On her bridge, operators from 3 of the world's most elite special forces lay subdued, while a Navy SEAL team stood victorious. The hunt was over, and as always the hunters had become the prey. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the Meridian Dawn's battle-scarred deck. Shadow watched as US Navy helicopters approached, their distinctive silhouettes a welcome sight after the chaos of the past few hours. "Casualty? Report!" He called into his comm, his voice hoarse from exertion. 3 wounded on our side, all stable. Doc responded from the medical bay where he was treating injuries. 17 Russian operators captured, 4 critically wounded. Chinese teams took heavier losses. 11 confirmed casualties before they retreated. CIA team lost 2 operators. Ghost's voice joined in. Ship's structural integrity is holding, but we've got multiple hull breaches below the waterline. Damage control teams are on it, but she'll need serious repairs. From his perch, Hawk monitored the surrounding seas through his scope. Areas clear. Chinese vessels are maintaining distance. Russians are gone. Looks like everyone got the message. Tank and Slash were supervising the securing of prisoners, ensuring that some of the world's most dangerous operators remained contained. The captured Russians and remaining Chinese agents were being zip-tied and prepared for transfer, their expressions a mixture of resignation and professional respect. Captain Chen, or whatever her real name was, approached Shadow on the bridge. "Well done, Commander. Though I suspect this isn't quite the piracy interdiction mission you were expecting." Shadow gave her a measured look. "You used us. Set this whole thing up as a trap to see who would come after your cargo." "Yes," she admitted without apology, "and it worked. We now know exactly which organizations have moles in our transport operations. Worth every bit of chaos it caused." She paused, looking out over the ocean. "Though I have to admit, your team performed even better than our projections suggested." Before Shadow could respond, his secure satellite phone buzzed. Direct line. To command. The conversation was brief but intense, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "Ghost," he called after hanging up. "Delete everything, all footage, all data, all records of what happened here. This operation never existed." "Already done, boss," Ghost replied. "Though I've got to say, this is going to make one hell of a story that we can never tell." Below decks, Doc finished treating the last of the wounded. The captured operators would live to face questioning, though Shadow suspected most would disappear into black sites before any formal charges were filed. Some operations were too sensitive for normal channels. The first Navy helicopter touched down on the deck, disgorging a team of intelligence officers and specialist containment crews. Whatever the weapon really was, it was about to vanish into the depths of the U.S. military research complex. 2 days later, Shadow stood on the deck of a U.S. Navy vessel, watching the Meridian Dawn being towed toward a secure facility. His team was gathered around him, their mission officially complete, but classified beyond top secret. "You know, what's funny?" Ghost said, his equipment already scrubbed and sanitized. "Somewhere out there, 3 different intelligence agencies are writing reports about how their elite operators got taken down by what they thought was just a standard anti-piracy team." Tank chuckled, his deep laugh carrying across the deck. "Maybe next time they'll think twice before hunting in our waters." "Speaking of hunting," Hawk added, cleaning his rifle one final time, "anybody else notice how Captain Chen disappeared right after the debrief? Along with whatever that weapon really was." Shadow nodded silently. He'd been briefed on the true nature of their cargo, information so sensitive it would never leave the secure room where he'd learned it. Some secrets were better left in the shadows, where they belonged. "What matters," he finally said, looking at his team, "is that we did our job. Whatever game the CIA was playing, whatever the Russians and Chinese were after, it stayed out of the wrong hands." As the sun set over the ocean, the SEAL team watched the Meridian Dawn fade into the distance. Another mission complete, another story they could never tell. But in the end, that's what made them who they were. The silent professionals, the hunters in the dark, the ones who got the job done when no one else could. Doc summed it up perfectly, just another day at the office. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the ocean, other threats were waiting, other missions would need their special touch. But that was tomorrow's problem. For now, they had earned their rest, until the next time duty called them to hunt in dangerous waters.